I am from the created. Well, the answer is yes. So any questions? There's a bit more to it. I hope that we all believe that we are specially created. We start off by a quote from one person from the US who wrote us. His name was Seth, and he counted the following. The first day of my biology class, my professor said he would be teaching from an evolutionary perspective. How does it feel to know you came from a monkey? It was a rhetorical question, no evidence was considered, and he didn't let anyone answer him, and none did. I felt like I was the only one who was upset by the comment and was too afraid to say anything. Well, had I been there, I would have been upset too, and I would have said something. I would have firstly said to him, sir, it sounds like you believe in evolution, but what you've just said is not what evolutionists believe. Evolutionists do not believe that we come from monkeys. No, evolution teaches that we share a common ancestor with monkeys, and that would have been an ape-like creature. So I would say that this biology teacher should have done a little bit more of his homework to understand evolution better. Now, because you've been so good at filling out things that go around in clipboards, I want to give you a plug for something free. This is our InfoBytes email letter, and it's free. It's something that we send to your inbox, a digest, which is a summary of the last 2 weeks. And if we're in your neighborhood and you put in your air code, then we give you a highlight that the speaker of us is going to be in your area. So God willing, hopefully we'll come back to Ireland and maybe we'll pass through Dunleary. So if you were to sign up for that, you might be notified. Now, what is some of the things you get in your digest? Well, we've had an article in the past that was a No to Racism Backlash campaign. What was happening? Well, perhaps you've heard about this, that in football, maybe also in other sports, there's a lot of racism on the stands. Very much so in Italy, but also in other countries. And an artist was asked to come up with a campaign to do something against this racism. So here's what he came up with. He came up with a bunch of chimpanzees and that had different colors on their faces, representing the jersey colors of some of the teams in the Serie A in Italy. And people were a bit perplexed because they were asking, what were you doing? And he said, well, isn't that what we teach the students and the children and everybody? That we all share ancestry with monkeys, chimpanzees in this case, and so therefore we all are cousins of apes, and therefore this is a good campaign. Well, many people did not agree with him, but I agree with him. If what is being taught is true, we are all related to apes, and therefore this campaign was actually quite a success. Coming from a biblical perspective, of course, I disagree. Now, this is an article that you would maybe get in your reader. Our Canadian colleagues make Creation Magazine Live. So that's a chat show, just under half an hour, that tackles 1 or 2 topics with 2 hosts typically. And if you like to watch things online, maybe at the leisure of your own home with a cup of tea in your lap, pretty soon you can see this alien. Actually, it's Gavin who's doing a presentation, E.T. or Close Encounters of a Biblical Kind. So this is on Friday the 10th of June. So if you go to our website, creation.com, scroll down a wee bit, you'll see free webinar, click on the button, and we'll let you in. And you can listen to what Gavin has to say, and you can even maybe ask a question in the chat if you want to. Gavin is passing around the clipboards. Please write clearly. We do not pass on any information to anyone. It's just for us so we can send you an email every so often. We'll not spam your inbox every day, don't worry. And if you don't like it, just unsubscribe when you want. Now, as the clipboards go around, I'll just start off with a question to challenge you. Can you marry your relation? Don't have to answer now, and I won't make you raise your hands at the end either. I'm giving you the question and the answers, and then I'm going to give you a presentation to consider it. So the answers are yes, no, probably, or only after counseling. Anyway, I'll start off with a super quick overview of the book of Genesis. We uphold the truth and authority of Scripture in its entirety at CMI. Of course, goes without saying, we focus on Genesis a lot. So it starts off with one man. There's no points or biscuits for guessing his name. Adam, of course. He was made directly from the dust of the ground, by God, who created him. And he was given dominion, we read. Now, other words, other Bibles translate as stewardship or rule over, but basically he was given dominion over the creation. But Adam also spells bad news, didn't it? Because Adam disobeyed. How so? God clearly instructed him to not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What happened? He ate. And with that disobedience, called the original sin, or the fall, introduced death. Okay, so death was a result of Adam's disobedience. Now, Adam didn't die on the spot. Yes, he was spiritually separated from God. In fact, he and his wife chose to hide when God was walking around. But he did live on quite a considerable amount of time before he physically died. Adam became 930 years. So he was able to have offspring, and offspring had offspring, had offspring, had offspring. And so you find these patriarchs in the lineage from Adam through Noah, Abraham, David, ultimately even to our Lord Jesus. Brings me on to the good news. Jesus is the good news, the gospel. That's the message of hope we share. Who is Jesus? Well, the other book that starts with "in the beginning" is, of course, the Gospel of John. And in it, we learn that the Word was God. Later on in verse 14 of that chapter, we learn that it's about the incarnate Christ that this talks about. So he came into the world. He was born of Mary, lived a sinless life, and was raised to glory. He is the sovereign Lord. He was involved in the creation. Let's read, for instance, Colossians 1. Everything was made by him and for him. The whole Trinity was involved in creation, but certainly Jesus was too. And unlike Adam, Jesus was perfectly obedient. That is very important because that's also the reason that he is the only qualified person to have taken the penalty on the cross and died for my sin, for your sin, because he was blameless, he was sinless. And he is called in 1 Corinthians a life-giving spirit. The last Adam it refers to. That's critical that he is called the last Adam. Not the last Eric or the last Samuel, not the last Adam. Because he goes back directly to the very first man, Adam, who was made from the dust of the ground. And particularly at Christmas, we sing about Emmanuel, don't we? Jesus is God with us. He came to live among us and lead by example. Later in Genesis, we read about a flood, of course. This is in Noah's life, and chapter 6 and 9 are the ones that I'm referring to. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and he had a wife, 3 sons, and those 3 sons had wives each as well. So the total are 8, and that's confirmed by Peter in his epistle. He did not spare the ancient world, he being God, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. Notice there that Noah is called a herald of righteousness. So it took a long time from the time that God warned Noah about the flood to the flood actually coming. And Noah was preaching to the people. Doom is pending. Danger is coming. Come on board the ark. How many came? Just his family, just those 8. However, we do find accounts of floods all over the world. It's not just the Bible that we learn about a big flood. You find these all over the globe. And here you see a little table of flood traditions around the world. Now going across from left to right, you see different people groups. This is just a selection. If I put all the people groups there, it would be too small for anyone to see what it says. Even now it's kind of touch and go. On the left-hand side, you'll see different aspects of Noah's flood as described in the Bible. So you read, for instance, a man is in transgression, and there's going to be a divine destruction. Okay? So those are components of the Bible. It says about birds being sent out. Now where these two cross, sometimes you see a green square or a red triangle. That means that there is an overlap, that they are compatible. So the left one, for instance, the Assyrio-Babylonia, they have all these components. And I want to read to you 3 of those, just quickly, so you get a bit of a flavor for it. Now the Hawaiian legend speaks about one good man left in a wicked world. He made a great canoe to save the animals and his family, and his name was Nu'u. The Chinese, on the other hand, they report that the entire land was flooded. It talks about Fuhi escaping the flood with his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters. A temple has a wall painting depicting a dove with an olive branch flying towards Fuhi's boat. Isn't that remarkable? We don't think of the Chinese as a Christian nation per se, although the church apparently is growing quickly there, but they have reports in that land that clearly is pointing back to Noah. Now, and I like this one that I'm going to read is from the Toltecs Indians of Mexico. They relate about the 1716-year-old world devastated by a flood covering the highest mountain. That is remarkable, 1716, because that's only 200 years or less even from the number that is given by the Bible itself, from the day of Adam to the flood coming. What else do they say? A few men escaped the flood and afterwards built a great tower for a safe place. Languages became confused and people scattered. How can this be that we have such accounts all over the world? And there are many more. Well, we read also in the book of Genesis, chapter 11, about Babel, don't we? People stayed in one place. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Notice that I've put some words in bold there. Who are they talking about? Who are they focusing on? They're focusing on self. They're thinking primarily about themselves, not about God. And so I think that they were clearly disobedient because God had said to spread out and fill the earth. They were futile in their thinking. First of all, they disobeyed God. Not a good idea. They were building a tower for a safe place. Well, how high do you think you have to build a tower? The highest mountains were covered, it said. And also, had they paid attention to God, they would have learned that God had made a covenant. That never again would God destroy the whole earth by a flood. So had they listened, they would have realized we don't need a tower because God is not going to do this. But that's what you get when you focus on self and you do your own ideas and you forget God. You do silly things. I do. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Is this one language Hebrew? Personally, I think so. That's not what my talk is about. But the word Hebrew is associated with Eber. Now, who's Eber? He was a descendant from Shem, and to Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. Now, when we say divided, we believe at CMI that was a division by language. Its name was called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. We believe that they were split up in families speaking different languages. If you find yourself for a prolonged period of time among people that speak gibberish according to you, you can't understand them and they can understand you, do you think you would stick around very long? I don't think I would. I would go somewhere else. And that's what happened. People dispersed. Who knows what the longest chapter in the Bible is?
Psalm 19.
Yes, well done. People know their Bible. Good, good. Psalm 119 is indeed the longest chapter, and it's called an acrostic. What is an acrostic? That's a composition in which certain letters in each section form a word or words. Now, what do we get here in this acrostic? Well, there are 22 paragraphs, each with 8 verses. Guess what? The Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. And you guessed it right, each stanza in the Hebrew text starts with the next Hebrew letter in the alphabet. Now, I've already given away that I'm from the Netherlands. And so my national anthem is also an acrostic. Did you know that the national anthem for the Netherlands is a very Christian song? Typically, when we're at a tournament that we're inevitably not going to win, we will sing the first verse of the anthem. I'm going to read to you the 6th verse, which would be the next one that we normally sing. Okay? A shield and my reliance, O God, thou ever wert, I'll trust unto thy guidance, so leave me not ungirt, that I may stay a pious servant of thine for aye, and drive the plagues that try us and tyranny away. Actually, the acrostic of the national anthem spells William of Orange, not insignificant in this country, but that's what it is. So, now, we're talking about alphabets, and I've said Hebrew's got 22 letters. How many is our alphabet? Any of the young ones? 26, bingo, that's it. Hungarian has 44 letters. And we have got a supporter in Budapest. He says, we're going to be speaking Hungarian in the new heavens and the new earth. I said, oh, that's interesting. How so? He said, well, it takes forever to learn, that's why. So, I'm not too sure about that reasoning, but hang on, we'll see. Did you know that the code of life God has written is DNA, and it's got 4 letters? Now, before you start, now list it here, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. Before you start arguing 4 letters, that's a rubbish alphabet. What can you possibly do with 4 letters? Let me point out to you that I think most of you will be familiar with 2 alphabets that have only 2 characters. And they work quite well. Put up a picture and I'm sure you'll recognize it. Anyone seen this before? Morse, that's right. So you can, well done, you saw it as well, didn't you? So you can make with sounds, short sounds or long sounds, and if you follow this agreement, you can spell words. Here's another one. You recognize that? Ones and zeros. Every binary system, that's right. Every computer software, or even the software on your smartphone or your computer at home, ultimately boils down to transistors being on or off, 1 or 0. And so you have an alphabet of 2 characters, 1 and 0, on and off. So it's not the amount of letters that really is what makes information content, it's how you organize these characters. Now granted, an alphabet of just 1 character is useless because all you can do is repeat the same thing endlessly. So you need more than 1. Well, there you go. There's 2 with 2 characters, and the code of life is 4. And here you see a depiction of DNA. It's a bit like a ladder that was twisted around its axis, isn't it? And so you've got these horizontal rungs that you see there. They're called base pairs. And base pairs form, the letter A always goes with the letter T, and C always goes with G. So how many rungs are there? How big is the ladder, the total ladder? Well, there are on either side 3 billion letters, so there are 3 billion rungs. Now I realize that I find it very difficult to imagine large numbers. So I'm going to give you an analogy. The Bible in the English language has approximately 3.5 million letters. So to get to 3 billion, you would need to stack 800 Bibles on top of each other. This ceiling is nowhere near high enough to do that. That information, 800 Bibles worth, is in each and every one of your cells, apart from blood cells, of which you have trillions upon trillions. Gavin was talking about these large numbers. I stand in awe of the one who can do that, who can make that. 800 Bibles in each and every one of your cells. That's the information content. How long does it take you to read through the Bible? Fairly long, I would say. How about 800 Bibles? Think about it. God is worthy of our praise. Amen. And this man, Werner Gitt, recognizes that. He is the head of department of information technology in Germany, although I reckon he's probably retired now. He looked at this code, he wrote a book about this code, and he studied it. And he changed, what if this parameter was like that, and that parameter was like this? And so he made all these changes and calculated through the information density. And he came to the conclusion of the code of life, which is in humans, but also in animals and in plants and trees. Here's his conclusion. From an engineering point of view, the code system used in living organisms is the best of all possible codes. It could not have made any more information densely packed. That makes perfect sense, people, because we serve a God who doesn't cut corners, who doesn't do half efforts. He does the best. And so this guy recognizes when we do science, we can do science after God's heart, to seek him out, and we learn wonderful things. Now, connecting genetics with genealogies, you might wonder, how on earth do you do that? let me introduce a question that is asked in the Creation Answers book. Who was Cain's wife? This is often a question asked for people that think, I'm going to trip up this Christian. I'm going to ask who Cain's wife was, and they'll not know the answer to that. Well, if you talk about biblical characters, where's the best place to go to find any answers? Precisely. You go to the Bible. And so you go and read in Genesis 5 verse 4, the days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. He didn't just have Cain, Abel, and Seth, he had other sons and daughters. So the answer clearly is Cain married his sister. Perhaps a niece, but at least somebody must have married their sister at some point or another. Now, before you get carried away and get a little bit perplexed, let's continue thinking this through. It was Leviticus 18:6, you can look this up yourself, where God instructs Moses, none of you shall approach any one of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. Now, I think that the adults can work out what uncovering nakedness means, so I'm not going into that. I am the Lord. It's emphasizing this is an instruction for me. What does that mean? That people are no longer to marry next of kin. So no longer marrying sisters or brothers, cousins. Now let's think about that. So when was this written? This is attributed to Moses. When did Moses live then? Well, approximately 1400 BC. At CMI, we would put creation just over 6,000 years ago, or just 4,000 a little bit before Christ. So you may ask, well, what was going on between 4,000 BC and 1400 BC? Well, let's look at a few examples. Abraham married a half-sister. I lied about it. Jacob married two of his cousins. And so the question could be, why are Abraham and Jacob not questioned? It's always poor Cain that gets it. You see, when God said this, did he know something that we were to invent only millennia later? We were to find out, scientists to find out, because clearly now you're no longer to marry a close of kin. And that was commanded to Moses. God knew something about genetics that we didn't know. What we do now, know a teeny tiny little bit. Let's look at what people say about our genome. So genome is all the genetic information that you have, that I have in our trillions and trillions of cells. This is a famous geneticist. He's no longer with us now. He was quoted by our friend of the ministry, John Sanford, by saying, "We are genetically inferior to caveman." Now, what picture comes up to you when you hear about cavemen? Typical depiction you see, which is erroneous, but it looks something like this: a guy with a baseball bat in one hand, dragging his wife out of the cave by her hair. Is that the picture that you have? I have that. I don't know why, but... But he says, that caveman type or that depiction, we are genetically inferior to that. That's interesting, isn't it? Let's look at what another evolutionist has to say. Alexei Kondrashov, he's of bioengineering in the Moscow State University. He studied evolution long, and this is what he said. There is no human geneticist that doubts that man is degenerating. Another way of saying degenerating is getting worse, going downhill. He goes on and asks a question. Why aren't we dead 100 times over? That is a good question, and I know the answer to that. The answer, Alexa, is because people have not been around for the hundreds of thousands of years that you think they have been around for. They've only been around for a few thousand years. Okay, we've heard from two evolutionists, which is very strong for our case, because it's a testimony by the enemy, if you like. What does creation have to say about it? Here's John Ashton. We sell some of his books. We no longer have that with us now, but he said this: what we observe in research laboratories today is DNA slowly deteriorating, not new DNA evolving. What does this mean? This means we actually observe the very opposite of evolution. Because evolution teaches that things are getting better and better over long periods of time. But what we actually measure and detect and observe, and not just creationists but evolutionists as well, is that things are getting worse, it's going downhill, and we are degenerating. And not just people, animals and plants too. Now, if we know that things are getting worse. And we then say there was something better in the past. What can we say about genetics in the past? We can certainly say something about genetics in the past. We're going to talk about common ancestors. And we'll start with the ladies, because it's only good and proper to do that. And I'm going to show you a little thing that looks, it's a cartoon picture of a cell, but looks a bit like a jacket potato cut open, doesn't it? But in it you see that purple-blue thing there. That is the nucleus. In the nucleus is where the information is kept. It tells you what color your hair should be, whether it should be black, brown, blonde, or no hair. It tells you the information of what color eyes you have. Everything to make up you. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what goes on around that. And there you see something enlarged. These are called the powerhouses or the power factories of the cells. And that ATP synthase that Gavin mentioned earlier are on the cell linings of these devices. Now these are mitochondria and they have their own DNA. It's called mitochondrial DNA, very suitable name. Now this information, this DNA, is passed through the maternal line. So irrespective of whether you are a boy or a girl, your mitochondrial DNA is from your mom. Okay? Now, secular scientists, that's no Christianity professing scientists, went around the world and studied the mitochondrial DNA of people around the world from different people groups. And they came to a conclusion. Their conclusion is this: all people alive today descend from one female ancestor. And they even call her mitochondrial Eve. This is not because they believe in the biblical Eve. They believe that there were thousands upon thousands of women at the time, but only that one woman has still offspring alive today. All the other lines of the other women were dead ends. They all died off over time. Still, I think it's a pretty good name if you're a Bible believer, don't you think? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the gens. Here you see a depiction of our 23 chromosome pairs. They are pairs because you get one set of 23 from your mom and one set from your dad. And on the bottom right, you see one that is colored red or ringed red. That's the Y chromosome, or the sex chromosome, the Y part of that. That is passed on through the paternal line. So fathers give that Y chromosome on to their sons, but not to their daughters. Okay? So boys have a sex chromosome combination of X and Y, and girls have two X's. Okay? So secular scientists who don't profess to be Christians at all, they went around the world and investigated the Y chromosomes of men around the world in different people groups. And they came to a conclusion. The conclusion is that all men alive today descend from one male ancestor. They even call him Y chromosome Adam. Not because they believe in the biblical Adam. I think it's a pretty good name. I've got an even better name. I don't think they're going to adopt it though, but I would suggest, how about Y chromosome Noah? Think about it. Anyway, what do people say about the Y chromosome? This is Sandy Fleming, she's a press officer. She said the Y chromosome may be a symbol of masculinity, but it is becoming increasingly clear that it is anything but strong and enduring. What's more, the Y chromosome has degenerated rapidly. There's that word again. Degeneration, even on the male sex chromosome. So this is very much accepted stuff by evolutionists and creationists. In comes Richard Buggs. He's an expert in evolutionary biology. He has realized that everybody accepts this now. And so he said, the question has moved on from, well, the question was originally, is an Adam and Eve bottleneck, it's a bit of a scientific word perhaps, inconsistent with human genetic diversity data? Let's move on. That's no longer debated. We all agree on that. So what is the question now? At what time scale could an Adam and Eve bottleneck be consistent with human genetic diversity data? Notice that this man names Adam and Eve together. Sounds quite biblical because they were, weren't they? However, the evolutionists would say, oh, this Adam and Eve, they could live thousands of miles apart or be separated by centuries, if not millennia. Anyway, irrespective of that, let's look at an answer from this guy. Professor of evolutionary genetics at University College London, Mark Thomas notes this. We only have to go back a few thousand years before we reach somebody who is the ancestor of everybody alive today. Did you notice that? A few thousand years. He's not a Christian, as far as I know. A few thousand years? Hey, that sounds to fit quite nicely what the Bible teaches. Now, before you get excited and jump on the bandwagon, he's an evolutionist. One thing I know about evolutionists is they quite readily change their mind if they need to adjust their narrative to make things fit. So instead of basing your thinking and your argumentation with your colleagues and your neighbors on this guy, build your thinking on the Bible, because it changes not. It is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now let's talk a little bit more about genetics, because it seems like you're all loving it. You've not fallen asleep yet, so must be doing something right. Here you see two dogs. These dogs have hair. They have a hair gene. Now genes often have two parts. They're called two alleles. So on their bellies, walking away from the mic for now, you see one allele for short hair and one allele for long hair, and they both have intermediate length hair. Okay? It's a bit of a simplified example, but it illustrates the purpose. Now these dogs get together, go on a date, and they end up being married, and they have some puppies. One puppy inherits the short hair allele from both mom and dad, and therefore this doggy has very short hair. Twice as many puppies will inherit one allele from each parent, and they just look like their parents with medium length hair. Now the very astute among you will have calculated what the fourth one will look like. That one will inherit the long hair allele from both parents and looks like a fuzzball. Now imagine that you take this group of dogs and you're going to emigrate them. Let's put them along that bit along the top where you see a lot of white that represents snow and ice, quite cold. Unfortunately, the ones with short and medium hair don't do so well. They don't make it on. But the two with the long hair do quite well. They thrive because they are suited for this environment. They are well adapted to do well in the cold. And they fall in love. And they have some puppies of themselves. And guess what? All their puppies look the same. Why is that? Because the only information that is able to be passed on is the long hair information. And so all the descendants of these two parents have long hair. The information for short hair has been lost from this particular population. We can call that speciation, we can call that variation within the kind, but the key thing to note is here that no new information has been added. Existing information has been called out by what we call natural selection. Because the short hair and the medium hair, it was too cold. That's very important, because evolutionists will tell you, will tell your children, will tell the students. They give examples like this from natural selection, which we have zero problems with. This is observable. But then they call that evolution, and then they expect you to believe that evolution can also cause a single-celled amoeba a few billion years ago turn into you now. No. That's not possible. That is adding a lot of information, and a lot. Where does that information come from? Evolution doesn't know. But let's move on, because we're going to talk about people. Here you see a depiction of Adam and Eve. It's a cartoon, so don't worry, it's not a real photo. Notice that they are mid-brown. And they have letters underneath them, just like these alleles that help determine the tone of their skin color. And I say that deliberately. Let's just say that capital letters means you have darker skin, and lowercase letters means you have lighter skin. Can you see that their offspring can have selections from these letters? And therefore you have different shades of color. And I say shades and tone for a reason. Why do I say that? Because we all human beings have the same color. It's a pigment called melanin. Some of us, little, others here in the room have more melanin, and there are people out there that have even more melanin. And so you can get a whole spectrum of the one color, and I call it the color brown. Very light brown to very dark brown. And here you see a bit more scientific in a Punnett square. You can also find that in the Creation Answers book, how that would work with two mid-brown parents. And you can see different shades if you go from top left to bottom right. Now, let me introduce you to two friends. I hope they're friends. If you saw these two girls walking in the street side by side, would you be, and don't answer this, but would you be inclined to think, oh, that's lovely, there's two friends, two different races, that's great. They've defeated racism there, haven't they? Let me tell you, these girls are not just friends, they are sisters. And I'll go even further, they're twin sisters. And I can show you a picture of them when they were a bit younger. There they are. Now, a few points to note. If people say, these two girls are a different race, how? They were in the same womb for about 9 months. They came out of that womb minutes apart. How can they possibly be a different race from one another? They are of the human race. The girl on the right, by the way, is not white. She's not white at all. If she was white, you couldn't see her. Because the background is white. But isn't it a bit true that we call the lady on the top right black, whereas actually the background is black? And you can think about it, that our words and our terminology sometimes is a bit unfortunate. I used to say that guy on the bottom right, he would be a lot whiter if he was dead for a couple of days. But again, I am not white. I am just very light brown. And I read a book and reviewed it from Angela Saini, and she said in that book called Superior, color takes on a new subtlety when every degree of pigmentation matters. And I want to take a moment to think about that time when Samuel was to anoint the new king. And he was over at Jesse's family. And Jesse brought out his sons, didn't he? And he put one in front of him, and he was handsome and tall. And in 1 Samuel 16:7 we read, do not, this is God speaking, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I, God, have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees, but looks on the outward appearance. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. That's how we need to look at people. Not what tone of skin color they have, whether they wear glasses or not, whether they have hair or not. Look at people's behavior, their heart, their actions. What are they like in that way, not how they look. So we are being taught by evolution, consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously even, about things. And I want to talk to you about two terms. Eugenics. What's eugenics? Eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population by excluding certain genetic groups judged to be inferior and promoting other genetic groups judged to be superior. The question in your mind should be now, who's doing the judging? So here we have a quote from Angela Saini again. We associate eugenics today with the fascists who perpetrated the Holocaust. But before the 1930s, many saw it as socially acceptable. In Britain, for example, systematically improved the quality of the British race, Darwin said that humans are animals like any other animal. And biologist Francis Galton said, well, if that's the case, then we can breed them better. He's talking about people there, folks. Actually, Galton was Charles Darwin's cousin. Now, another fruit of racism, and I do want to qualify something. All these things that are sinful are just that. It's not that evolution started it, it's sin that causes these. But evolution has kindled the fire in many ways. Let me quote you Stephen Jay Gould. Some of you will recognize this perhaps. Biological arguments for racism may have been common before the 1850s when Charles Darwin published Origin of Species. But they increased by orders of magnitudes following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. Cold, dispassionate, objective, modern science shows us that races can be ranked on a scale of superiority. If this offends Christian morality or a sentiment belief in human unity, so be it. Science must be free to proclaim unpleasant truths. I totally agree. I am all for freedom of speech. But is evolution the truth? That is the question. Now, this was in 77. Let's move on a bit and introduce you to Luis Quintana Murci. I'm going to quote him, and there's one new difficult work that I'll explain. He said, the genes that explain the phenotypic differences between populations only represent a tiny part of our genome. Now, what is the phenotype? What does that mean? Well, you've already been introduced to the genotype, that is your genetic makeup, but the genetic makeup determines how you end up looking in the mirror, essentially. There are some superficial things that you can do, like this guy who didn't decide to shave off his beard from 5 days old. But basically the phenotype is the outward appearance that's largely determined by your genetic makeup. So anyway, phenotypic differences. One of the key things, somebody's skin color, which is now a wrong word. We should say somebody's tone of skin color or shade of skin color, or the shape of their eyes, or anything else. Okay, so let's move on and see, confirming once again, so from science, the concept of race from a genetic standpoint has been abolished. So it's basically saying from science there is no reason for racism, from the Bible there is no reason for racism, and this is what the point I'm making. This is much nearer. So why is there still racism? Because clearly it's a hot topic. It's in different countries, it's being talked about. And this is a very important quote from the same author again in her book Superior. Those committed to biological reality of race won't back down if the data proves them wrong. They will simply keep reaching for fresher, more elaborate theories when the old ones fail. So you can debate them and wipe the floor with all their arguments. Doesn't matter. They'll concoct some new arguments. And why is that? All this to prove what they have always really wanted to know, that they are superior. There you have it. They want to be bigger and better and more important than their neighbor, than their friends. They want to look down on other people. What does the Bible say about that? Pride. We should be humble and think better of others than ourselves. So what is the answer? Well, we have to go back to the Bible. The Bible speaks about one man and one woman, and he made them in his own image. And in the New Testament, it is once again confirmed that we all descend from Adam. He made from one man every nation of mankind. And in Revelation, we read that from every tongue and every tribe and every nation there will be worshippers there. Now, coming back to the topic of marriage, which we started off at the beginning, Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees about marriage, actually divorce rather. And what does Jesus do? He goes back to the book of beginnings and quotes from Genesis 1 and 2. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. You know these passages, these are familiar to you. So can you marry your relationship? Your relation was the question at the beginning. Hopefully by now you realize that yes, because if you're not marrying your relation, then you're not marrying a human being. We are all one family. Sorry to inform you folks, I'm your family. In fact, I had a birthday in February. You wish to give me a present still? No? No. Now, what does evolution say? I mean, there are questions that might come to your mind. You'll have seen this. We'll talk a little bit about this in the final few slides. Did we evolve from ape-like creatures? Haven't missing links been found? And what about the Neanderthals? You probably have read about that. No time to go into much detail. You can look at our website, but there were links, missing links, supposed and proposed by evolutionists in the past. And many of these are some older-fashioned ones. There have been others, been rebutted since. They have been rejected. They were cancelled. There were no links. They were frauds. They were blunders. They were forgeries. But we're going to talk about the bottom one, the ape-to-human progression icon. Now, I have to warn you, this piece of the presentation is going to be a little bit meaty, so hold on to your seats. One of the earliest ones of this progression icon you see here, from 39. And then a more recent one, you can start to see the picture a bit better. Let's look at this. With only 2 exceptions on that one, Dryopithecus and Solomon, each link in the progression icon is drawn taller. This is not due to fossil or other empirical evidence, rather it's a result of artistic license. It's a penny drop. This is a piece of art. It's not science, it's art. And it's a good artist, can do good drawings, better than me. But beware, some of these pictures, and there's new shows coming out made by the BBC, computer graphics, unbelievably good. It looks so realistic. It's man-made and there are artists involved. Let's continue. Although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, that means they go on all fours. All are shown here standing for purposes of comparison. Some of them were physically unable to stand erect, to stand up. And what's more, they were actually drawn walking. So some of these can stand, but they're drawn standing and even walking on 2 feet. That's not science, that's propaganda. Here's another one. All are shown as expert runners. They all look very human-like in their body type. The artist speculated on skin tone and the amount of body hair and its texture, and that the relationship of the fossils pictured is still not fully understood. It doesn't matter that we don't understand it. We want to sell our magazine, so make a nice picture and sell it by the thousands to make some money and indoctrinate people, pretending that this is what really happened. Now, what do evolutionists think of these things? Here's that Stephen Jay Gould again. He said, "March of Progress. My books are dedicated to debunking this picture of evolution." Bernard Wood, George Washington University, said this: "There's a popular image of human evolution that you'll find all over the place. On the left, there's an ape. On the right, a man. Between the two is a succession of figures that becomes ever more like humans. Our progress from ape to human looks so smooth, so tidy. It's such a beguiling image that even the experts are loath to let it go. But it's an illusion. Yet we cling to it." 2 more. Henry Gee, senior editor at Nature, a very prestigious scientific journal. "We've all seen the canonical parade of apes, and each one becoming more human. We know that, as a depiction of evolution, this lineup is tosh. Yet we cling to it." Tosh is a very scientific word that you need to understand. Do you see? They are rejecting this. They continue to use it. Last one. Tim White, very involved with Lucy, also a link, missing link. "The familiar iconography of an evolutionary march to modern man has been proven wrong for more than 60 years. Doesn't matter that it's wrong. We'll continue to use it. The picture speaks more than 1,000 words. We've got to push this evolution, and this picture has done wonders for us. Not science. Now here's a more realistic progression icon from baby to man. And really, this progression icon, it's all about change in size and hair. Now, I used to have a 6-pack here when I was younger. Now I carry a little barrel around. And I used to have beautiful waving hair as well. But we live in a cursed world, don't we? But seriously, on the right-hand side, that's going to be us. Hopefully long from now. But realistically, 10 out of 10 in this room, 10 out of 10 out there. And maybe you'll get a tombstone with 2 numbers on it. And in between those 2 numbers, there's a little line, a little dash. That's your life. That's my life. The question is, what do we do with it? Do we glorify the Creator? Or do we keep swallowing the lie of evolution? Hopefully, maybe you were already convinced after some of the points Gavin and I have made, you'll be even stronger convinced. So concluding, our great-great-great-great-grandparents were not ape-like creatures. No, we are directly descended from Adam and Eve. And therefore, all people around the world, no matter where you go, you'll run into a relative. It's a distant relative perhaps, but we're all family. And we're all devolving. And there's something else very important that we have in common. We're all sinners, and we need a Savior. So some closing comments about you. You were human from conception. Sinful human being, but you were human. David wrote in the Psalm, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." The moment of conception, when there was a zygote form, that's a sinful human being right there. And the next one I'm going to read to you, but I don't comprehend. Prior to that conception, you were a person. God speaking to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I cannot comprehend that. But God said it. Must be true. And God made you and me and all those people out there in His image. And so when we look at people, we have to look through Jesus' eyes. There's an image of God walking right there. So we have a lot of information on our website. Creation.com is the most difficult URL you'll ever see in your entire life. Extremely difficult to remember. But do use it if you have questions. If somebody asks you a question, some of the ones that Gavin shared, you can type that in and you can find answers. And you can read about it and talk to your friend about it. Or you can send them the link if you're a bit unsure. And we have materials up there. Now, some of them on the blue tablecloth, yes, you have to buy it. There's still some things for free on the left that you can take and peruse and share with others as well. But a few simple ones, a little booklets. What does the Bible really say about Adam and Eve by our own associate speaker, Tommy Fretwell? Some of the points that I've used are in there and some other points as well. And we have this little booklet, Is Human Life Special? I know that you know that the answer is yes. But this gives you a few things. For instance, what can you say when you're talking to somebody who claims to be pro-choice and thinks that abortion is just fine? And then lastly, I want to say about Carl Wieland. He has written a book that's available electronically only now, but he's also made a lecture about it. And he talks about the cultural differences, because we do have to understand, even though we are one human family, there are major cultural differences, even among nations that are not so far. I moved from the Netherlands to Spain and I realized this is quite a different culture. Some people here are from Brazil. Again, very different culture. If you go, for instance, to Australia or Indonesia, my brother is married to an Indonesian. Very different culture. And so all these cultures have validity and people look a bit different. But what is their heart like? That's what we got to focus on. Now, and I'll quickly remind you, that magazine, if you miss the sign up, we'll have a few more slides there. But thank you for your time. And I think we're going to enjoy some refreshments, coffee, tea, and snacks.